Hi there. It's May the 8th, and we are continuing in the book of 1st Samuel, which is one of the books of the former prophets in the Hebrew scriptures, the Nevi'im Rishonim. And we are in completing today chapter 2, and we're going through to the end of chapter 4. These are really tragic and shocking chapters in the story of Israel, although they have in the midst of them the calling and the speaking of the prophet Samuel for the first time. So Samuel, we saw yesterday, was left in the temple, in the tabernacle, I should say, at Shiloh by his mother to serve the Lord. And then we learn in the second half of chapter 2 about the terrible behavior of the further terrible behavior of Pinchas and Hophni, the sons of Eli the high priest, who is also the judge of Israel at this time. And Pinchas and Hophni, it transpires, are not only taking parts of the sacrifice that don't belong to them, that belong to the Lord, but they're also having sex with the women who come and who stand around the gate of the tabernacle, the door of the tabernacle, which is something that the Baalim priests would have done. So they are copying the terrible ways of the surrounding tribes by having sex with the women who are coming to worship at the tabernacle. And Eli takes them to task about this, and he realizes his sons are in mortal danger of judgment from God, and so he upbraids them for what they're doing, but he doesn't actually stop them. He can't really stop them. And a man of God comes at the end of chapter 2, a man of God being a word for a seer or a prophet, and he prophesies the destruction of Pincus and Hophni. He says they will die on the same day, and there will be a terrible judgment against Israel for what is going on right at the heart of the worship of Israel, which will unfold. In chapter 3, the action focuses on Samuel, who's a little boy, and he stays in the tabernacle, and he maintains the tabernacle, and he sleeps there. And at night he hears a voice. Now, we're told at the beginning of chapter 3 that there was no breakthrough vision, is perhaps a good way of translating the Hebrew. There was no vision that was breaking through from God at that time. However, and also Samuel has not heard from God before. He's not heard a word from the Lord. He's only young. So he's lying and he hears a voice calling his name, Shmuel, Shmuel, Samuel, Samuel, calling him twice. You notice in Hebrew scriptures that often the name is called twice. When something significant is being said, or God is really trying to get someone's attention, he calls the name twice. So he calls his name twice, Shmuel, Shmuel. Samuel runs to Eli thinking that Eli's called him, but actually Eli hasn't. And then Eli sends him back. And actually the third time it happens, Eli realizes that Samuel is hearing from God, and so he says, next time it happens, simply say to God, Daber Adonai ki shomea avdecha, speak, Lord, because your servant is hearing. And so the fourth time it happens, Samuel says to the Lord, Lord, speak, your servant is listening. Now that word shomea in Hebrew is very important, because it's not just I'm hearing and I'm listening to what you're saying, but it's actually an attitude of listening. It's an ongoing, continuous, present listening and hearing. So it shows that Samuel has a heart that is open. It's a heart that's ready to hear even when God isn't speaking. And that's something that as servants of God we can cultivate, is a heart that is constantly listening, constantly open to what God wants to say to us. Now the words that God speaks to Samuel, to this little boy, are really along the same lines as what the man of God has said at the end of chapter 2, and it's the prophecy of the destruction of the line of Eli, of of Pincus and Hophni, and terrible tragedy to come upon Israel. And from this, Samuel is known then and is established from that point as a prophet in Israel and as one who hears from God. Now in chapter 4, this tragedy unfolds. The Philistines come and attack the Israelites and actually seem to be winning. They're getting the upper hand against the Israelites. So the Israelites call on God and they bring the ark from Shiloh. They bring the box chest with God's covenant in it, to take into battle and to go before them, rather like a mascot or a trophy, to go into battle before them. And they believe that in doing this, they will triumph. In fact, when they bring the ark of God into their camp, they have a great shout of triumph, and the Philistines hear it, and the Philistines are afraid because they realize that this is the ark of the God who has afflicted the Egyptians and who had delivered the Israelites from them, and so they're really afraid. But then they say, come on, let's be men, let's stand up to these Israelites, let's not be governed by them or overwhelmed by them. And in the ensuing battle, the tragedy occurs, and Pinchas and Hophni are both killed, and the ark is captured and taken by the Philistines. News is then taken back to Eli, and it's interesting that in the news that is relayed back to Eli, it's not so much the death of his sons that do for him, but it's actually the news that the ark of God, the box chest of God's covenant, has been captured by the Philistines. Eli falls off his seat. It says he's old and he's heavy, and he's 98 years old, and in the fall he breaks his neck and dies. And then there's this last tragic statement about the wife of one of the priests, and she is with child, and the news of the taking of the ark of God causes her to go into labor, and she brings this child forth, and she calls the child Ichavod. That means inglorious. There is no more glory. Ichavod. Kavod means glory. Ichavod, the glory has departed, the glory is gone. What an inglorious situation Israel finds herself in. So we learn much from this about the reality of the need to keep close to God in covenant. And it's good to remember that Samuel, in the midst of all this one who's growing up, and it says he is growing up in favour with man and with God, and he continues to listen. Even though around him things are going so badly, he is constantly keeping his ears open to God. Let's keep our ears open to God constantly. Have a very good May the 8th.